6 months after finalizing his divorce, Ethan Harris, a world-renowned automotive designer, found himself sitting in a sleek, upscale cafe in downtown Chicago. The hum of subdued chatter and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee served as a soothing backdrop to a rare moment of relaxation in his otherwise relentless schedule. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored blazer, his polished image reflecting years of dedication to his craft. From the outside, Ethan's life seemed perfect. An illustrious career, a penthouse overlooking the city, and accolades for designing some of the most innovative vehicles in the industry. But beneath the surface, there was an emptiness he couldn't ignore, a hollow ache that his success could no longer mask. As he sipped his espresso, Ethan's attention drifted from the tablet in front of him to the cafe staff moving seamlessly between tables. One server in particular caught his eye. She carried herself with quiet grace, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her uniform crisp and pristine. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, but he couldn't quite place it. Then she turned toward him. Ethan froze, the realization hitting him like a lightning bolt. It was Olivia, his ex-wife. But what truly left him stunned wasn't just seeing her there. It was the unmistakable curve of her pregnant belly. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, each one louder than the last. How had he not known? Why hadn't she told him? And most importantly, was the child his? His mind raced. Olivia? Pregnant? How had he not known? He did a quick mental calculation. She looked about 7 or 8 months along. The timeline fit. Could the child be his? As Olivia approached a neighboring table, her eyes met his for the briefest of moments. Her expression betrayed a flicker of recognition, followed by something more complex. Pain, anger, perhaps even regret. She quickly masked her emotions, focusing on the customers she was serving. But the damage was done. Ethan felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. 6 months ago, they had parted ways amicably, or so he thought. Olivia had left their shared life behind with poise, determined to move forward. They had agreed their differences were irreconcilable, with Ethan's career ambitions taking precedence over everything else. Yet now, as he sat in that cafe, everything he thought he knew about their separation came crashing down. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had to know the truth. Was the baby his? And if it was, why hadn't Olivia told him? Ethan left the cafe that day with his mind in turmoil. The image of Olivia, visibly pregnant and working as a server, replayed in his head like a scene he couldn't escape. Questions swirled around him, colliding and overlapping until he could barely think straight. He had always told himself that their divorce was mutual, a necessary decision given how far apart their priorities had grown. Olivia had wanted a family, a partner who was present and involved. Ethan, consumed by his ambition to revolutionize the automotive industry, couldn't give her that. At the time, he had convinced himself it was better to let her go than to continue disappointing her. But seeing Olivia now, her figure softened by pregnancy, working in a job so far removed from the life they had once shared, it stirred something deep within him. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. For all his success, Ethan suddenly felt like he had failed in the one place it truly mattered. The ride back to his penthouse was a blur. As he stepped into his pristine apartment, the silence was deafening. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but tonight, it felt hollow. Ethan paced the room, his thoughts spiraling. Could the child be his? The timing aligned almost too perfectly to ignore. But why hadn't Olivia told him? Did she think he wouldn't care? Or had she decided he wasn't fit to be part of their child's life? Ethan sank into the leather couch, his head in his hands. He had spent years perfecting his image as a visionary, a trailblazer in his field. That night, Ethan sat alone in the living room of his penthouse, the glow of the city skyline filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view, once a source of pride, now felt hollow, unable to fill the emptiness growing inside him. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let the memories flood in. He remembered Olivia in the early days of their relationship. She was radiant, with bright eyes and a smile that could instantly erase the stress of his day. They used to walk hand in hand along the riverfront, talking about their dreams and the future they wanted to build together. She gave him a sense of peace he'd never found anywhere else. A vivid image of Olivia in their small kitchen surfaced, her sleeves rolled up as she prepared dinner. She'd laugh at his clumsy attempts to help, turning every mishap into a shared joke. Back then, he had thought their life would always be simple and full of joy. But those warm, happy memories quickly shifted to moments of tension. Ethan saw Olivia sitting alone at their dining table, her face clouded with disappointment when he called to say he'd be late again because of another important meeting. Those calls became more frequent, and over time, he began to notice the light in her eyes dimming. Another memory played out. One late evening when Olivia waited for him, her voice was steady but tinged with pain as she asked, "Ethan, what are we doing? I feel like I'm not even part of your life anymore." He had replied, "Olivia, this is for our future. Just a little longer." But a little longer never came. Then came the final memory, one that always cut the deepest. The day they signed their divorce papers. Olivia sat across from him, her shoulders squared, her expression calm but unbearably sad. "I don't blame you, Ethan," she had said. "We just aren't walking the same path anymore." Her words echoed in his mind as he opened his eyes, his chest tightening under the weight of regret. "We had everything," he whispered to the empty room. "How did it come to this?" Ethan stared out at the city lights, their faint glow like distant stars. In that moment, he realized that what he had lost wasn't just a marriage. It was the one person who had truly understood and loved him for who he was. The next day, Ethan buried himself in work, hoping to drown out the whirlwind of emotions. But even as he reviewed blueprints and fielded calls from clients, his thoughts kept drifting back to Olivia. His concentration shattered completely during a design meeting when a colleague's question went unanswered for an uncomfortably long moment. "Ethan, are you all right?" the man asked, his brow furrowed in concern. Ethan blinked, forcing himself to refocus. "I'm fine," he lied, though the tightness in his chest told a different story. He wasn't fine, not by a long shot. That evening, as the city lights twinkled below him, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't ignore this. He had to find Olivia and get answers. If the baby was his, he deserved to know. And more importantly, the child deserved to have a father, one who was present and committed. With that resolve, Ethan began searching for a way to reach Olivia. It wasn't easy. They had severed ties completely after the divorce, and he didn't even know where she lived now. But Ethan was nothing if not resourceful. A few discreet calls later, he had enough information to track her down. 2 days later, Ethan found himself standing outside Olivia's apartment building. It was a modest place in a quieter part of town, worlds away from the upscale life they had once shared. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering near the doorbell. What would he even say? How could he explain his sudden appearance without it sounding like an invasion of her carefully built new life? Summoning his courage, Ethan pressed the button. Moments later, Olivia opened the door, her expression shifting from surprised to guarded skepticism. "Ethan," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he replied, his tone measured but firm. "About the baby." Olivia's posture stiffened, her hand tightening on the door frame. "This isn't the time or place for that conversation," she said curtly. "Then when?" Ethan pressed, his voice tinged with urgency. "I need to know, Olivia. Is it mine?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she might slam the door in his face, but instead she sighed and stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms over her chest, Her voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of pain. "We'll talk, but don't think for a second that I owe you anything, Ethan. Not after everything." The bitterness in her voice cut deep, but Ethan nodded. He had come here for the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to hear. As they walked toward a nearby bench, Olivia's words were sharp and unrelenting. She accused him of prioritizing his career over their marriage, of leaving her with no choice but to walk away. Ethan listened in silence, her every word a reminder of how much he had let her down. When she finally fell quiet, he took a deep breath. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But if that child is mine, I want to be part of their life. I want to do this right, Olivia. Please, give me a chance." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, her arms still crossed. "You've got a long way to go, Ethan," she said quietly. "But we'll see." As Olivia turned and walked back into her apartment, Ethan stood motionless for a moment, the weight of her words settling over him. This wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of determination. The days following his visit to Olivia's apartment were a whirlwind of emotions for Ethan. Her words lingered in his mind. "You've got a long way to go." He knew she was right. Words alone wouldn't rebuild the trust he had broken, but he was determined to prove he had changed. Ethan started small. He texted Olivia to check in, offering to help with errands or appointments. Her replies were brief, often curt, but she didn't shut him out entirely, which gave him a glimmer of hope. He understood that her guarded responses weren't born of malice, but of self-preservation. She needed to see his actions, not just hear his promises. One of the first breakthroughs came when Ethan asked to attend a prenatal class with her. It was an awkward request, and he braced himself for rejection. To his surprise, Olivia reluctantly agreed. "Don't make me regret this," she warned as they entered the small community center. The class was both enlightening and humbling. Ethan fumbled awkwardly with the baby doll they were instructed to diaper, earning a few amused glances from the other parents-to-be. Olivia, ever efficient, corrected his clumsy attempts with a quiet sigh and a faint smirk. "You're supposed to fold it like this," she said, demonstrating with ease. "Show off," he muttered, his tone teasing, though the warmth in his voice was unmistakable. That small moment of shared levity felt monumental to Ethan. For the first time in months, he saw a glimpse of the Olivia he used to know, the one who laughed easily and had once been his partner in everything. Over the next several weeks, Ethan continued to show up. He joined her for more prenatal classes, brought her groceries when she was too tired to shop, and even helped assemble the crib she had ordered for the baby. Each act, no matter how small, was a step forward in his effort to show Olivia that he was committed to being there for her and their child. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when Olivia's defenses flared, and she reminded him sharply that she wasn't ready to forgive or forget. During one particularly tense encounter, she said, "Don't think for a second that showing up now erases everything you did or didn't do before." Her words stung, but Ethan didn't let them deter him. He knew this journey wasn't about seeking her forgiveness. It was about earning her trust one day at a time. In the process, Ethan began to rediscover parts of himself he hadn't realized he'd lost. Tasks he once dismissed as trivial, picking out baby clothes, helping Olivia plan the nursery, even cooking simple meals, felt grounding in a way his professional achievements never had. One quiet afternoon, as they sat together folding tiny baby clothes, Olivia glanced at him and said, "I didn't think you'd actually stick around." Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable, and Ethan felt a pang of regret for all the times he had let her down before. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. His voice carried a quiet determination, the kind she hadn't heard in years. "I mean it." Despite her reservations, Olivia began to soften. She still kept him at arm's length emotionally, but there were moments when her guard slipped. One evening, as they worked together to hang a mobile above the crib, Ethan's clumsiness led to a broken light fixture. Olivia sighed heavily, shaking her head. but couldn't suppress a small laugh when he sheepishly offered to fix it. "Just let me handle it," she said, climbing onto the step stool. "Hey, I'm trying here," Ethan replied with mock indignation, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. Moments like these, though fleeting, gave Ethan hope. But the most profound moment came one night when Olivia sat on the couch, her hands resting lightly on her belly. She suddenly grabbed his hand, guiding it to a specific spot. "Here," she said. "Feel that." Ethan's eyes widened as he felt the baby's tiny kick beneath his palm. His breath caught, and his voice was filled with awe. "That's incredible," he whispered. Olivia smiled faintly, and for a brief moment the distance between them seemed to disappear. Though the moment passed quickly, it was enough to keep Ethan going. As the weeks passed, they settled into a tentative rhythm, preparing for the baby's arrival. It wasn't the same as what they had before, but Ethan realized that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. This time, he wanted to build something stronger, something real. It was late one evening when Ethan's phone buzzed, pulling him away from the sketches he had been working on in his home office. The storm outside was raging, rain pounding against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Glancing at his phone, he saw Olivia's name on the screen. His chest tightened. She rarely called him. "Olivia," he answered quickly, concern lacing his voice. Her voice came through, strained and barely above a whisper. "Ethan, it's time. I think the baby's coming." The world around him blurred as her words sank in. "Where are you?" he asked, already grabbing his keys. "At home," she said, her breath hitching. "I tried calling for an ambulance, but the storm—" "I'm on my way," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "Just hold on." The drive to Olivia's apartment felt like a race against time. The storm had worsened, turning the roads into rivers of water. Visibility was nearly zero, and fallen branches and debris littered the streets. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the treacherous conditions. Every second felt like an eternity. The thought of Olivia going through this alone, in pain and scared, fueled his determination. He couldn't let her down. Not now. When he finally reached her building, the storm had knocked out the power, leaving the structure shrouded in darkness. Ethan parked haphazardly and sprinted through the rain, his clothes quickly soaked. He pounded on Olivia's door, calling her name. The door opened, revealing Olivia, pale and trembling. Relief flickered across her face when she saw him. "Avon," she breathed, her voice weak but steady. "I didn't think you'd make it." "I told you I would," he said firmly, stepping inside and wrapping an arm around her. "Let's get you to the hospital." Olivia winced as another contraction hit, her hand clutching his arm for support. "It hurts," she admitted through clenched teeth. "I know," he said softly, guiding her toward the car. "We're almost there." The drive to the hospital was no less harrowing. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Olivia's, murmuring reassurances as she breathed through each contraction. The hospital's emergency lights came into view, glowing faintly through the downpour, and Ethan felt a surge of relief. Once inside, the nurses quickly assessed Olivia's condition and rushed her to a delivery room. Ethan stayed by her side, his presence unwavering as the chaos unfolded around them. The hours that followed felt both endless and fleeting. Olivia gripped Ethan's hand so tightly he thought his fingers might break, but he didn't let go. He whispered words of encouragement, brushed damp strands of hair from her face, and marveled at her strength. "You're doing great," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You're incredible, Olivia." She shot him a tired but skeptical look. "Don't patronize me," she managed between labored breaths. He chuckled softly despite the tension. "I mean it." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of a baby's first cry filled the room. Ethan's breath caught as he saw their son for the first time, tiny and perfect in the doctor's hands. The nurse placed the baby on Olivia's chest, and tears streamed down her face as she gazed at him. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan leaned closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "He is," he agreed, his voice trembling, just like his mother. For a fleeting moment, the weight of their past seemed to fade, replaced by the overwhelming joy of this new life they had created together. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the baby, marveling at the tiny fingers that curled around his own. "What should we name him?" he asked softly. Olivia smiled through her exhaustion. "I was thinking of Liam," she said. "Liam," Ethan repeated, his chest tightening with emotion. "It's perfect." As the storm outside began to calm, Ethan sat beside Olivia, their son nestled safely in her arms. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The weeks after Liam's birth were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments of profound joy that Ethan had never experienced before. His life, once meticulously centered on deadlines and designs, now revolved around a tiny, fragile human who needed him in ways no project or client ever had. Ethan spent nearly every spare moment at Olivia's apartment. He helped with feedings, soothed Liam during his fussy spells, and even attempted to tackle the towering pile of laundry, though his efforts often resulted in mismatched baby socks and shrunk onesies. It was exhausting, humbling work, but he embraced it with a fervor that surprised even himself. Olivia watched Ethan's transformation with cautious optimism. She could see the sincerity in his actions, the way he poured himself into every task, no matter how small. But the wounds of their past ran deep, and she couldn't let go of her fears overnight. One evening, after Liam had finally fallen asleep, Ethan and Olivia sat together on the couch. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Ethan glanced at Olivia, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. "I know we can't fix everything overnight, but I want us to try. Not just for Liam, but for us, for what we used to have." Olivia hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It's not that simple, Ethan," she said softly. "There's a lot we haven't dealt with, a lot we need to work through." "I know," he replied, leaning forward. "That's why I think we should go to therapy. Together." Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her face. "Therapy?" "Yeah," Ethan said, nodding. "I've been looking into it. There are counselors who specialize in helping couples navigate complicated histories. I think it could help us." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her thoughts racing. The idea of revisiting their pain, of digging into the moments that had led to their divorce, was daunting. But the determination in Ethan's eyes gave her pause. He wasn't just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. He meant it. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll try. For Liam." Ethan's shoulders relaxed, a small smile tugging at his lips. "For Liam," he agreed, though deep down he hoped it could be for them too. Their first therapy session was awkward at best. They sat stiffly on opposite ends of the couch, unsure of where to begin. But their counselor, a kind yet firm woman named Dr. Lennox, guided them with patience and empathy. She encouraged honesty and vulnerability, pushing them to confront the emotions they had buried for so long. During one session, Olivia's voice trembled as she admitted, "I felt invisible, Ethan, like I was just there. You didn't see me. Not really." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut, but he didn't shy away. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I thought I was building something for us, but I wasn't paying attention to what you needed. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." Slowly, over weeks of sessions, they began to untangle the web of resentment and miscommunication that had defined their past. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, tears, and even anger, but they stuck with it. Outside of therapy, their dynamic began to shift. Ethan continued to show up in ways that mattered, not just as a father, but as a partner. He listened when Olivia spoke about her day, offered to cook dinner with varying degrees of success, and even took over night feedings so she could get much-needed rest. In turn, Olivia started to trust him more. she began to see glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had always been there, but had gotten lost along the way. One quiet afternoon, as they were folding Liam's tiny clothes together, Olivia glanced at Ethan. "You're really trying, aren't you?" she asked, her tone soft. He looked up, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "I am," he said simply, "because you and Liam are worth it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Months passed, and the dynamic between Ethan and Olivia continued to evolve. Therapy became a safe space for them to confront their past and rebuild a foundation for the future. Though progress was slow, it was steady, and both began to see the effort they put into healing reflected in their relationship. Ethan had grown in ways he never thought possible. Scaling back his work commitments, he found joy in the smaller, quieter moments, rocking Liam to sleep, cooking dinner with Olivia, or simply sitting together as a family. He no longer measured his success in accolades or milestones, but in the love and laughter that filled their little apartment. One evening, Ethan cradled Liam in his arms while Olivia sat nearby, watching them with a soft smile. The sight of Ethan, so attentive and gentle, stirred something deep within her. "You're good with him?" she said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice held a note of surprise, as though she hadn't fully expected to feel this way. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I had a good teacher," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. Olivia laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Don't give me too much credit." She paused, her tone growing serious. "You've come a long way, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Her words caught him off guard, and for a moment he couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was filled with emotion. "That means everything to me, Olivia. Thank you." The room fell quiet, save for the soft sounds of Liam's breathing. Ethan glanced at Olivia, his heart full. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying all the weight of his journey back to her. Olivia's breath caught, her eyes glistening. "I love you too," she whispered. And in that moment, as they sat together with their son, they knew they had found something worth fighting for. A new beginning, built on love, trust, and a second chance at happiness.